Welcome to episode 95 of Real Health Radio. You can find the links talked about as part of this episode at the show notes, which is www.7, so the word all spelled out, SEVEN health.com/95.
Welcome to Real Health Radio. Health advice that's more than just about how you look. And here's your host, Chris Sandel.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Real Health Radio. This is my first solo episode in a while. As I mentioned last week, I've had a lot on over the last little while, and so I just hadn't had time to put together a solo show. And one of the things that I mentioned last time was that I've actually been working on an app. It's a food log app that I've been creating with a past client who's a developer, and the app's called Tummy. And I've been using it now with clients for about the last 18 months. And we're getting to the point where I'm wanting to roll it out, or we're wanting to roll it out to a wider audience. And before we begin to do that, we just want to get more users trying it out. And this can be practitioners who want to try it out with their clients, or it can be individuals who want to just use it for themselves. And if you're on my mailing list, you should have already heard about this, but I'm doing a webinar where I talk about what we've created and why, because there are lots of health apps and there's lots of food log apps that are out on the market, but just none of them did what we wanted them to do. So I'm going to run through some of the shortfalls of the other options and then demonstrate what we've created. I'm going to give you the opportunity to ask questions and also to then try it out for free. So the webinar is going to be next Thursday, the 15th of June, in the evening time. Well, at least it's going to be in the evening time in the UK. It will be at different points of the day, depending on where you are located around the globe. If you want to join me live, you can still register to join the webinar. If you go to www.7-health.com/tummy webinar, so all spelled out as one word, TUMMY webinar, WEBINAR. Even if you can't make it live, if you then go there and sign up, you'll then be sent a link of the recording once it's done. And I really am super excited about this. And I work with a lot of clients who struggle around food. And when I've created the app, or when we've been creating the app, these have been people at the forefront of my mind. And so we've made it so certain functions like calories or macros or logging someone's weight can be turned off so that this information just isn't available. And you can even go so far as to turn off the ability to log food altogether and instead just have someone use it to monitor their sleep or their mood or other symptoms. So if you have a real negative reaction to the word food log, I still suggest that it's worth checking this out, because I work with lots of clients who would fall into this category, but they're able to use Tummy without an issue because of the ability to alter what gets displayed. But I'm going to end it there and give you lots more information about this next Thursday. So if you are interested, as I said before, you can register www.7-health.com/tummy webinar. So on today's show, I want to talk about context in respect to health. And it's an area I've written on before. I've probably done different pieces on it over the years, but I haven't dedicated a podcast show to it before. And this episode, it's not the same deep dive that I do with certain shows and with certain topics. It's going to be a lot shorter, but I do think it's equally important. And I've been doing lots of talks lately in London. And when I give a talk, I always try and make it a discussion. I find that when people ask questions, everyone becomes much more engaged. It helps to keep things lively and interesting. And personally, I feel I'm at my best when I'm answering questions and answering questions on the fly. And the thing that happens more often than not when I'm asked a question is that my immediate response is, well, it depends. So pretty much every question I'm asked starts with me saying it depends, before then going into various scenarios and explaining why different situations produce different answers to their question. And the thing is, so often when I read health advice or exercise advice or nutrition advice, there isn't a it depends response. People are very black and white, that their way is the one true way. But I think with things around health, and things that come under the bracket of health advice, there's probably this tiny percentage, like say 5%, where there are absolute truths, where we can legitimately make blanket statements without any caveats or with giving very little caveats. But for the remaining 95%, and the percentage could be even higher than this stuff is very context specific. It really does depend on the individual. So, for example, the idea that someone will be healthier eating a diet that is made up largely of unprocessed whole foods versus a diet high in processed foods isn't that much up for debate. There is fairly substantial scientific data to back up this. But even within this, there are some caveats. Because if someone becomes obsessive about eating clean or eating only unprocessed foods, this can become a form of stress. And so in actuality, they may be healthier when their diet composed of some processed foods, but they had much lower stress levels around eating. Or if someone is recovering from an eating disorder like anorexia, calories just trumps everything else. This person needs to give their body huge amounts of energy to help with repair. And because of the palatability and the calorie density of processed foods, this is going to be more likely to help them than them sticking with a diet of just whole foods. And this is what makes it so difficult, because even with something that seems so simple and so obvious, like eating a whole foods diet, there are going to be exceptions. And this is hugely apparent for me when I'm working with clients, because I work with clients across a real spectrum, and what we focus on and what gets discussed is very different depending on that individual. So for example, I'll sometimes work with people who barely cook for themselves and live off a lot of takeaways and restaurant meals. And so with this person, what are we going to be focusing on? It's probably going to revolve around getting them to increase, say, fruit and vegetable intakes. Not always, but a lot of the time, if someone is constantly eating out and getting takeaways, their fruit and vegetable intake is going to be on the lower side. We'll probably look at habit formation and discuss priorities and how food and their food habits fits into this. And again, not always, but in a lot of cases, someone in this situation is wanting to eat more food that they prepare themselves, but they just haven't figured out exactly how to make this happen. So we might break this down and make changes that are then sustainable. Maybe we'll look at things like food prep and cooking to help this person develop skills in this area, or to relearn how to do this stuff if they've previously been doing it. And with all of this, it is client-led. What does this client want to get out of this? How do they want their life to look? Because not everyone wants to be preparing every one of their meals, or not everyone wants to be following low carb or low fat or paleo or vegan or whatever the practitioner believes is the best diet. It's not about creating perfection, because obviously perfection doesn't exist. It's about helping the client work out what helps them to feel better and supporting them so they can make these changes and have these changes become a reality and become a norm for them. And I then may be having another client or other clients who are in a completely different situation. And maybe they do already make all their own meals. Maybe they do already buy everything organic and healthy eating is their number one priority. And basically everything that I've then covered with this first client becomes irrelevant for this second person. And even if you go through the standard truths with regards to health, it's going to be largely a waste of time. They are already eating lots of unprocessed food. They are already doing exercise. They're already drinking plenty of water. If you think of all the standard health advice, they're already doing it. So for all intents and purposes, they are doing the healthy things that most books and magazines and articles are telling them to do. But despite this, they can be having issues. So maybe they need to be eating more. Maybe they need to be doing less exercise or different types of exercise. Maybe they need to work on their work-life balance or their self-esteem or how they talk to themselves. And what we chat about and the advice that we go over is going to be context-specific based on their particular situation and their particular symptoms. And It's really common to see people bashing like government guidelines or national guidelines or test reference ranges. And there are times when I do this myself and I disagree with this stuff. And I've talked about this on other shows where there's definitely being lobbying or vested interest in some recommendations, or there's definite evidence that another way is better. But I also realize it's incredibly difficult to make blanket statements at a population level. This advice just has to be so generalized and so watered down. And not just from a health perspective, but from lots of different perspectives. Like if you're living on minimum wage, what you can afford is going to be very different from someone who is in a middle class situation. And by afford here, I'm not just talking about from a money perspective, it also can be from a time perspective. And it can be very easy for health to become elitist, where there are those that are in good situations economically and socially who can assume that everyone else is in a similar boat. And there's just this lack of understanding or even maybe lack of compassion for what it's like for others in different situations. So when the government or really any national group is making recommendations from a health perspective, it has to be inclusive of everyone. And this means for a lot of people who are in good standing already, they feel like the bar is being set way too low. Or if they were to follow these guidelines, it would be a step backwards. But really, this should be just an awareness of like the privilege that you have and a recognition that not everyone has it so good. And for certain people who are currently doing their thing, when they follow these recommendations and start to implement them, things are actually going to improve for them. And so when I'm working with clients, I tend to think about context by thinking about levels of importance for that individual. And I kind of visualize it like a pyramid or steps. And the reason I think in this manner is because you could literally have 50 or 100 or even 200 things that someone could change or focus on to improve their health. But depending on where someone is at in terms of their health and what are the other things that they are currently doing or they have going on in their life, it will depend or determine how important that thing or those things are. Because what I find for most people, they aren't very good at weighing up what's most important. So in their mind, those 100 or 150 or whatever different options all have an equal value. Or they read some article that, say, hypes up some product or creates some alarm around a certain food, and this then gets their attention. And unfortunately, these articles are normally about some absolute minute detail of a thing that then ends up taking up a huge amount of someone's focus, while there are all these other genuinely important ideas that can make a really massive difference that are then ignored. So let me give some examples. At one of the recent talks that I gave, someone asked me, was it healthier to boil potatoes or to roast potatoes because they heard different things? And so my response was, I asked them about their sleep habits. I asked them about taking breaks during the daytime. I asked them about how much time they were spending sitting versus standing. I asked them about like using laptops or screens in the evening. And when we chatted, these were all areas where there were things that they could improve on or there were issues in these areas. And so I said that until these areas were then sorted out, whether potatoes were better boiled or roasted was like completely inconsequential. And to be honest, it's probably always going to be inconsequential because it's just such a minor thing. But there are definitely things that are more important than like roast potatoes versus boiled potatoes. But while they are important, they might not be just important right now. So for example, someone may ask me what I think about them having more protein with dinner, or about having different types of protein, say having more seafood versus having more meat. At some point, these could be worthwhile things for someone to pay attention to. And maybe by making changes in these areas, they do see improvements in their health. But to start with, there might be much more important things for them to focus on. And people can only focus on so many things at once before it becomes overwhelming. So rather than create this overwhelm, it probably, or it might be better for them to then shelf these ideas until it becomes more relevant. So to start with, this person might be not cooking dinner and they really want to do this. So rather than spend precious brain space thinking about whether they should be having 100 grams of chicken or 150 grams of chicken, they're better just focusing on making cooking dinner a habit. And when this has happened, then maybe it would be appropriate to focus on the difference between having a little more or a little less chicken and changing other things with their food to see what happens. And with a lot of these things, there's no absolute reason why they can't focus on this area at that point. It's just knowing that things become more relevant the further up you go as you go up different levels. And as you tick off and start doing more of the foundational things, then you can start incorporating more of the niche ideas. And it's then that those niche ideas can be a benefit. But in the beginning, they're more likely to just be a distraction and one more thing that makes you think about just another thing and another thing that makes it likely that nothing's going to happen, or a distraction means that you don't think of all of these other things that are genuinely more important. Another example of this come from Stephan Guyenet, who recently wrote a 2-part blog post on things that he's changed his mind on. And the second thing was phytic acid. So phytic acid is a substance that is primarily in beans and whole grains and nuts, and it reduces the absorption of particular minerals from our foods. And in certain corners of the health world, there's a lot written about the dangers of phytic acid, and it's part of the reason why people are encouraged to soak or ferment these products to help break down that phytic acid. And this isn't the only reason for this practice, but it's one of them. And what Stephan was saying in the article is that not only is there new evidence that the gut can somewhat adapt and overcome the issues of phytic acid-rich foods, so the more that they are eaten, the more capable someone gets at being able to digest these things. But even without that capability, he no longer feels it's a big deal. And to quote Stephan, he says, "The more I learn about health, the more I tend to focus my attention on a few simple factors that I think account for most of the health benefits of diet and lifestyle. Don't smoke cigarettes or use alcohol excessively. Get regular physical activity. Eat more whole foods. Get restorative sleep. Manage stress. And don't eat too many calories. These guidelines may not be exciting, but they deliver a lot more than the detail that often distracts us." And so while I don't agree with everything Stephan has to say about health, I think he makes a really good point here. There are things that can impact on our health outside of the things that he just mentioned. But you've got to start with what's most important and think about what level are you currently at and what's most relevant. And this can be difficult for a lot of people, and especially if someone has been reading about health for a long time and trying out different things. There's an internet marketer called Frank Kern, and this is going back a while, so things may have changed for him now, but he was saying that whenever he looked at the people who were buying his products, they were largely novices. They were people who were new at the marketing game, or if they weren't new, they were yet to have much success. And this wasn't everyone, but this was the bulk of people that were buying his stuff. But despite the fact that the bulk of the people who were buying his stuff were beginners, if he advertised a product as being for beginners, no one would buy it. So instead, he'd advertise it as being super advanced tactics or ninja methods only for the pros or some kind of other marketing type speak. And the people would then buy it. And the people who were buying it were the complete novices. And I think we often have this tendency to think we are more advanced along the health journey than we are, or we want to try some new cool health thing rather than just follow the basics. And it makes me think of one of my friends in respect to sports gear. Like, he's always going for the best of the best. And I remember years ago when we were doing a lot of cycling, and he just bought some of the most expensive wheels. Like, 2 wheels were more than the cost of what most people would spend on an expensive road bike. And they tested these wheels at some elite level, and they'd found that over the course of 50 kilometers, it would give you an extra 30 seconds, or it'd cut 30 seconds off. And this is for like elite athletes. So like, if you were Sir Bradley Wiggins and you use these wheels over 50 kilometers or 100 kilometers or whatever it was, it would save you 30 seconds. But my friend was not Sir Bradley Wiggins. He was not an elite athlete. He was an amateur. And the better wheels made absolutely no difference to his performance whatsoever. He wasn't at an ability where he could really benefit from this minor change. And he would have been better spending that money on getting a cycling coach or having more leg massages or a host of other things that would have actually improved his performance. And this is how I see many people approaching health. They are panicking or overthinking these microscopic details that only matter when you've worked all your way up to the top levels where they can make a difference, and yet they are still down the bottom. And I'm not immune to this stuff myself. Like, I can easily get sucked in. And I remember fairly recently reading through a list of dietary supplements, and they were talking about different dietary supplements and why they could be beneficial. And one of the supplements was actually nicotine gum. And it was talking about the benefits of using nicotine gum in small quantities and not too frequently, and how this can be beneficial. And I'm kind of blanking on the mechanism of how it worked or why it worked. I think it was to do with it being a stimulant, or it might have been for hormetic reasons. I can't really remember. But I just do remember having this moment of thinking, like, maybe I should try this out. But then the rational part of my brain kicked in, and I was like, there are so many other things that I could be doing that would give me much more benefit. And to not get pulled down that rabbit hole of something so minute, and to actually just focus on the bigger wins. So I guess what I really want to get across in this podcast is that health is context specific. There are some absolute truths, but even with these come caveats. And really for like 95% of the other ideas, it's just context specific. And when we're being context specific, you should be finding the things that will make the real difference and that you can genuinely change, and not being suckered in by the idea that there is only one correct way of doing something, or get suckered in by something that's shiny or novel or different. And one final thing I do want to just add to this is this then shouldn't become like the idea of alternative facts, where because there's nothing true or there's nothing concrete and it's contextual, that means anything can be an option. There are a lot of bad health ideas out there. And just because there isn't one diet that everyone should be following, this doesn't somehow make all the crackpot food ideas more plausible. Like, we can very easily rule things out, even though we might not be able to 100% rule something in for every person. Because there's a difference between being open to ideas versus like blindly accepting an option that presents itself. Like, you still need to use critical thinking and be evidence-based. And I'm in no way suggesting like a bad idea free-for-all under the guise of being context-specific. So that is it for this week's podcast. I know it's shorter than usual, but it was something that I've been thinking about lately because of the talks I've been doing. And I just wanted I wanted to suggest that you keep it in mind. So as usual, I'm going to be back next Thursday. Have a great week and look after yourself.
Thanks for listening to Real Health Radio. If you are interested in more details, you can find them at the 7 Health website. That's www.7health.com.